Hi, welcome to this latest episode of Digging for Truth. I'm your co-host, Henry Smith. One of the most controversial topics in the area of biblical archaeology is the subject of Jericho and the account found in Joshua chapter 6 in the Old Testament. To help us explore the questions about Jericho, archaeologist Joel Kramer joins us today by Skype from Amman, Jordan. Joel is the founder of SourceFlix Ministries and the producer of the film Jericho, Unearthed. Joel, welcome back to Digging for Truth.
Thank you. Good to be back.
Hey, it's great to have you back on the show. Last year you were with us to talk about the oldest Yahweh inscription, and
Yes.
that episode was fantastic. We've had tons of people watch that and comment on it. But today we're going to talk about a different subject, and that is the subject of Jericho. Now, before we dive into that, I'd like you to just sort of, if you could, give folks a brief introduction to your ministry, what you do, what your calling is, you and your family, and why you're over there in Amman, Jordan right now.
So we've been over here for about 13 years, and SourceFlix does primarily video work. It's a media ministry, and it deals with Bible reliability issues and mostly through video. And we continue with that and have had a long haul, and it's been a lot of fun.
Now, we talked about this before, but I just have to say, you went to Israel, you know, as a guy interested in the reliability of the Bible who does film, and you ended up getting an archaeology degree. That's very interesting in the providence of God.
Yeah, well, that's Dr. Bryant Wood's fault, really, because the film that we're talking about today, was one of the first films that I did over there while living in Jerusalem, and he inspired me. So I enrolled in school and worked on a degree, and so I don't know, maybe he ruined me. Maybe I was a better filmmaker than archaeologist.
Well, there's not too many archaeologist filmmakers. There's lots of filmmakers, lots of archaeologists, but not both. So
there you go.
So Dr. Wood has inspired a lot of people, including myself and many others. So when you got to Israel, I mean, in the beginning, this is probably the first major project that you did. Tell the audience why you chose this subject of Jericho in Joshua chapter 6.
Well, I asked the scholars in Israel what the number one challenge to the Bible was, and all of them had the same answer. They said it's Jericho. And so I wanted to start with the biggest challenge, and so that's why we took on this film first, the crew that I had and myself.
So no piddling around. You wanted to get to the toughest subject that there was out there. I think it would probably help the audience a little bit. Maybe share some of the things that they were saying, a little bit more particular about, why Jericho and the archaeology there is a problem for the Bible. What are some of the arguments that they had?
Yeah, everybody agrees that the site of Jericho is the one that the Bible is talking about, and but they claim that the archaeology doesn't match up, and it really comes down to the pottery. They don't see the pottery dating to the right time, and really it comes down even more specific than that to imported pottery from Cyprus. And so the claim is because this particular type of import wasn't found, then there wasn't a city or a city wall at the time that the Bible describes the attack by the Israelites on Jericho and the wall tumbling down.
So maybe you could introduce that. That's very good. I think it's a helpful, we know that archaeologists assign dates, and, you and I are going to explore the evidence we think actually fits the Bible perfectly. But maybe you could talk a little bit about the major players in this debate who've excavated at Jericho, particularly in the earlier days. Maybe give the audience a sketch of that for us.
Yeah, there's been 4 major expeditions at Jericho, all of them secular. The Germans excavated in the early 1900s, 1907 to 1909. Then John Garstang excavated in the 1930s. Followed by Kathleen Kenyon also like John Garstang, a British archaeologist, excavated in the 1950s. And then most recently, an Italian team has been excavating Jericho.
So that gives us sort of an overview of the four major excavations. Maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the views that they expressed in general about the archaeology at Jericho. What have you seen in what they've said as it relates to the Bible?
Well, I mean, there's the saying that we hear that we miss the forest for the trees, and I almost would say, these days you kind of got to change that saying and say we miss the forest for the twigs.
Yeah.
And really, it's really their arguments against the biblical account as far as the archaeology of Jericho go are twigs. They're details, extreme details. Like I said, this particular type of imported pottery is what they're talking about, and yet they're missing the forest issue, which of course the forest issue, and I was shocked to see this because I'd been told this is number one challenge against the Bible. The forest issue is that there is a collapsed city wall around Jericho, and everybody knows that and agrees to that. They argue, again, in the twigs, in the details, they argue about when that dates to.
Yeah.
But in the biblical world, of all the sites that have been excavated, lo and behold, Jericho is the one that has a collapsed city wall around it.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and in our next segment, we're going to jump right into the wall discussion. Maybe you could take about 45 seconds and just explain the imported pottery debate, and we'll kind of just give the audience an idea what that means and what you're referring to. About 45 seconds.
Yeah, so archaeologists have a hard time dating Canaanite pottery from this period, the Middle Bronze and the Late Bronze period, and so it's very similar from one period to the next. And so what they focus on is imported ware, in particular the type of pottery that was imported from Cyprus, and they use that to date because it comes from somewhere else. The problem is that not a city on the Mediterranean coast, for example, that has ships arriving, say Gaza, would have more imported ware than Jericho, that would be on the backside of the mountain in a backwater town.
Yeah, that argument has never made a lot of sense to me. Like, why would you expect that to be there in large quantities, particularly? It just doesn't seem to be a logical deduction. Based on the location of Jericho. I think you put your finger on something that seems very basic, a forest issue, if you will. Well, Joel, we're going to take a break right now. We're going to move into the discussion of the walls, because that's what people know about when they read Joshua chapter 6, and we'll be right back after this break.
In a culture of intense Bible-denying skepticism, Associates for Biblical Research exists to strengthen followers of Jesus by affirming the authority of the Bible. Our archaeological fieldwork and original research form a strong foundation in upholding the reliability of the Scriptures. For students or anyone asking if they can really trust the Bible, please visit our website and partner with us by joining our prayer team or financially supporting this ministry. And thank you for standing with us.
Hi, welcome back to Digging for Truth. I'm your co-host, Henry Smith. I'm here today with Mr. Joel Kramer. He's an archaeologist and a filmmaker, joining us from Amman, Jordan. Joel is the founder of SourceFlix Ministries, and we're talking about the city and destruction of Jericho as it's recorded in the Bible in Joshua chapter 6. Now, Joel, we were talking about imported pottery. You were talking about the big picture. I like that. We can get lost in details. Details matter, but also the big picture matters. And let's talk about another big picture issue, and that is what the account in Joshua says, and in contrast to the archaeology or compared to it, and that is the destruction of the walls of Jericho? Let's explore that for a little bit.
Yeah, everybody agrees that there's a collapsed city wall around Jericho because it's been found by different expeditions, including the most recent one, and so you have this stone wall foundation, and then you have a mud brick wall on top of that, and it's the mud brick wall that collapsed all to the outside of the city. And so, what is the story of what's most famous in the Bible about Jericho? It's the wall came tumbling down. And what is the most distinguishing thing that was found in the archaeology of Jericho? A wall that came tumbling down. It's a perfect correlation, and I wasn't expecting, being that I was told that this is the number one challenge to the Bible, I wasn't expecting it to be that obvious. And so it's this nitpicky then arguing over whether a piece of pottery is bent, like this or like this, when you have a whole wall that has collapsed around the city. In other words, what it comes down to is the Bible was able to tell us what we were going to find as archaeologists before, in this mound of dirt of Jericho, before any archaeologist ever dug it and then found exactly what it was describing. And to me, that's game over right there. The rest of it, the detail stuff is insignificant to the reality that a fallen wall was found at Jericho.
Yeah, and it wasn't just one expedition, was it?
No, it's I've seen it myself when I did Jericho Unearthed. It was being described to me by Peter Parr, who excavated there. But since then, the Italian team has uncovered it in a section there, and so I've seen the fallen bricks myself. And there's no way to argue that the wall of Jericho didn't fall. So the only thing that can be argued is the timing of it, that it didn't fall when the Bible said that it fell. But what they would need to explain is how did Scripture know that there was a fallen wall?
Yes.
At Jericho before it was dug up?
Yeah, that's a great apologetic question in one sense, Joel, because a lot of the material that's out there, academic material, claims that these stories of the Old Testament were traditions, that maybe pieces were passed down that was written much later, like during the exile or maybe during the divided kingdom period. And I've always asked the question, well, if it was written hundreds of years later or even 1,000 years later, how did they get it so right? Just the walls itself, and we have more to talk about, just the walls. Maybe comment on that, because to me it's extraordinary.
Yeah, I would say that the number one answer from secular archaeology is that during the time of Josiah specifically, a scribe was sent out to Jericho and then made up the story of the conquest under Joshua to give Israel a glorious history.
Yeah.
Well, this makes no sense at all, because you can look at the stratigraphy that was found in the tell of Jericho, and you can tell what was underground at that time and what was above ground. And guess what? This entire collapsed wall is underground at the time of Josiah. So the scribe wouldn't have seen any of the evidence that we're talking about that was uncovered by archaeologists. And so it's illogical.
Yeah, it's never made a lot of sense to me, and I think archaeology serves to undermine these theories about the origins and the development of the Old Testament. Now, we can't get into all that. Something that we were talking about, maybe you could explore this a little bit, this conflict of views, this forest and twigs, and then there's another element of it that you consider to be significant, and that is what we might call the politics of archaeology. Maybe you could just talk about that a little bit based on your experience of being there in the Holy Land for 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, things in the Middle East are driven by politics. And it took me a long time to figure that out. I don't know why exactly. It's pretty obvious, but so if you take the major excavations at Jericho, so we're talking about the same site being excavated by 4 different teams. The German team in 1907 to 1909, while they were digging Jericho, it was part of the Ottoman Empire. The next team was John Garstang's team, and during his excavations at Jericho, was part of the territory under the British Mandate. And then Kathleen Kenyon, who dug there 1952 to 1958, while she was digging it, it was part of the country of Jordan. And then this most recent excavation by the Italians, it was part of the Palestinian West Bank under the occupation of Israel. So you can see through the excavations of Jericho how dramatic the politics have been. And let me tell you, when it comes down to the interpretations of archaeologists, it's driven by the politics. If there's been a war, like between John Garstang and his excavations and Kathleen Kenyon,
Yes,
he was in 1936 is when he ended, and she started in 1952. There's a very important date. It's 1948, and so there's this war that's being fought to who has a right to the land. And believe me, when that war goes from guns to archaeological picks, politics is pushing everything much more than the archaeology itself.
Yeah, we don't realize that sometimes that those things, that kind of thing influences people and influences interpretation. There's pressures that are brought to bear. So we want to try to get at an objective analysis of it as much as we can. And people say that we're not objective because we're Christians, but everybody is influenced by different forces. And,
right.
What we're trying to argue for is really, when you look at the big picture of the evidence, it really does fit the biblical text with all these other considerations removed. Well, Joel, that's good, insightful stuff. It's something for us to be praying about. And folks, we'll be right back for our last segment with Joel Kramer talking about Jericho and Jericho Unearthed.
Bible and Spade is a non-technical quarterly publication published by the Associates for Biblical Research. Written from a scholarly and conservative viewpoint, Bible and Spade supports the inerrancy of the biblical record and is a must-read for both the serious Bible student and anyone asking if they can really trust the Bible. Archaeological evidence, properly interpreted, upholding the history of the Bible. Subscribe today at BibleArchaeology.org.
Hi, welcome back to Digging for Truth. I'm Henry Smith, your co-host, and I'm here today with Joel Kramer talking about the city of Jericho. Now, Joel, we talked about some of the influences, the big picture, and the way that interpretation of evidence can be influenced. There's other ways that it can be influenced as well, but let's get down a little bit, not into twigs, but a little bit into the little bit of the trees, and that is the fire. The Bible says that the Israelites lit the city on fire. What did the archaeologists find when we're talking about fire?
A massive burn destruction. And, to take it even a little further than that, really what it comes down to is you only can really, you can read about the story of Jericho in the Bible, and you can see it in the side of the bulk in the layer system. And so these are events that are recorded in these layers. And so what does the Bible say happened at Jericho? It says that the wall fell down, every man went up into the city. They burned the city, the Israelites burned the city, and then Joshua put a curse on the city that it wouldn't be rebuilt. For a long time. And then the Bible says that it was rebuilt at the time of Ahab. So those are the events recorded in the Bible. And what do you have in the stratigraphy found by archaeologists in the tell? You have that exact same sequence of events. You have a fallen city wall. You have a burn destruction, massive burn destruction across the city. And then you have the city, an abandonment layer that the city lays abandoned for a very long time. And then it's rebuilt again in Iron Age 2 period and at the time of Ahab. And so, again, this is the forest issue.
Yeah. I misspoke.
Yeah.
I said getting into the trees, but actually, in the way that you're looking at it, I should have said this is another forest issue. And
it is. Yeah.
I agree with you. I mean, talk about the size of the destruction layer at Jericho, just as an example, and the sort of scope of it.
Yeah, I mean it's black and white ash, and it's just it's massive. I mean it's like 4 feet, 5 feet thick in many places, and so this is the end of the Canaanite city. It is not rebuilt. By the time it's rebuilt, it's an Israelite city. And again, that we're stepping back, looking at the big picture.
Yeah.
We have the Bible saying Jericho was a Canaanite city, then it was destroyed, laid abandoned. Then when it became a city again, it was an Israelite city, and that's what we have in the archaeology.
Yeah. Those two key indicators. Now let's talk about another forest issue. What was found in some of the storage jars? Maybe it's a connected forest issue with the fire. Go ahead and share about that.
Yeah, so Garstang first started finding these storage rooms full of jars that were full of burned grain. And Kenyon came in and put in several squares, and she found exactly the same thing. By the time Kenyon came along, she could test the grain to find out what kind of grain it was. It's barley, and so the biblical account says that they crossed the Israelites crossed into the Promised Land across the river at flood stage because it was harvest time. Now, what harvest was it? It was they came across the river and then they celebrated Passover, and Passover celebrates the barley harvest. So, by the way, it's not very wise militarily to pause. When a city is about to bring in its harvest, you want to have that harvest for your army.
Yes.
But God had them pause and celebrate Passover while all this grain was brought into the city. And then when they attacked the city and God specifically said you're not to plunder the city, they burnt it as a big offering to the Lord.
Yeah, extraordinary. Another forest issue, it fits. I mean, they can debate the particulars.
Absolutely.
You got carbon-14 dating debates and some of the pottery debates, but there it is, exactly what you expect in sequence with the biblical text. Now, Joel, we got about a minute and a half or so. We kind of moved through quickly here. I'm going to be recommending, of course, your film because it's excellent. I rewatched it again, and I tell you, it just is great every time I've seen it. You had a guest on the show who dug at Jericho, Dr. Peter Parr, with Kathleen Kenyon. Would you talk about your experience with Dr. Parr just a little bit, and share with the audience that personal interaction that you had?
Yeah, so I asked my professor, who's the horse's mouth on Kenyon's position for Jericho, and I was told Peter Parr. So because he was the only one that was still alive that was a staff member that worked with her. So he came over to Jerusalem. He stayed with my family for 3 weeks, and it was fascinating spending that time with him and getting to know him. And he's a generational atheist, and I needed conflict. See, I'm a filmmaker, and everybody knows that you got to have a story in your film, and it's conflict that drives it. So my conflict was Dr. Wood versus Dr. Parr, and let them battle it out, and we'll have great conflict, and it'll be very interesting. But interestingly enough, when all the evidence was laid out before Dr. Parr, in regards to the things that we've been talking to, he folded. There goes my conflict. Yeah. I was not expecting him to fold, but he does. He says, well, it does seem like something like what the Bible describes. happened there. And the interesting thing is, of course, Dr. Wood comes from a Christian worldview, and Dr. Parr comes from a secular worldview. He just wasn't used to hearing the arguments from a biblical world. And so when he was presented with them, they actually made a lot of sense to him. And
that's excellent.
And so wow. I mean, this is the number one challenge to the Old Testament. That's wonderful because it's so obvious, and it's all downhill from here.
Yeah. Well, that's great, Joel. I'm glad you were able to minister to him, and we never know how the Lord will work through that. Joel, thank you. We're going to give information about Jericho Unearthed so they can purchase the DVD, folks watching, from the ABR bookstore to support your ministry and learn about Jericho. Thank you again for joining us. We appreciate you so much.
My pleasure. It's always a pleasure.
All right, folks, thank you for joining us today for Digging for Truth. We hope that this episode has encouraged you to trust the Scriptures. The stories recorded therein happen in real history, culminating in the gospel of Jesus Christ. Have a great day.